Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi, 1 week at a time. This is Masechet Zevachim, and today is our 6th class. Today we are going to be reviewing Daf 39 through 45. It's going to get a little complicated today. We don't have many dafim like we did last week. But there is definitely some complicated concepts that we are going to be discussing. Okay, so Daf 39 tells us that after the blood is placed on the altar, on the Mizbeach, the remaining blood needs to be poured on the base of the Mizbeach, on the base of the altar. Now, if that blood splashes on the clothing of the Kohen, of the priest, so then he has to wash it out. If the Kohen had improper intent, if you remember, we've been discussing pigul. Again, to remind us, pigul is intent to either eat the sacrifice or burn the sacrifice at the wrong time or in the wrong place. So that is called pigul. So pigul does affect this blood. And we haven't learned this yet, but there is a prohibition to do any of the temple service outside of the Beit HaMikdash, outside of the temple. So if this leftover blood, which is in Hebrew, it's called shiraim. Shiraim literally means leftover. Then if this blood is poured outside or offered outside, you would also be liable. Now, that blood that goes at the base of the altar, that's still part of the service, of the avodah, of the sacrifice. However, there is another thing that could be done with the blood, and that is if the blood needs to be poured into the canal. In Hebrew, it's called an amah. Amah literally means, it's a measurement, an amah, but that's like the width of this like canal that took the blood out of the temple complex. And leftover blood that was poured into this canal is not part of the service. That's like what we would call pouring it down the drain, literally. So the blood that goes into the canal, that if that blood spills on the clothing of the Kohen, it does not need to be washed out, and it does not affect pigul, right? Because that blood is not part of the temple service. Okay. Now that if the blood then the Gemara makes a distinction. If you remember, there are 2 types of sacrifices. One where the blood is placed on the Mizbeach, the altar that's in the courtyard, what we're going to call the outside Mizbeach. Don't get confused. It's not outside of the temple. It's just outside of the inside, right? It's in the open area of the temple. So that we're going to call outside, as opposed to what is called on the inside of the Beit HaMikdash, the inside being in the Heichal, in the building that is the Beit HaMikdash. I can show you, 1 second, maybe I will show you the picture again, just so that we remember what the temple looks like. Hold on 1 minute, I'm gonna open it up on my screen, and then I will share it with you. 1 second, please. Second screen. Here. Okay. I just want you to be able to see what the temple complex looks like. And again, I love this drawing, except that to me it's backwards. So I'm actually going to rotate it because you walk in to the temple from the right. Here, I'll make it a little bit bigger. That's a lot bigger. Okay. Okay, so just to remind us of what the temple looked like, you walked in from the right side of this picture. Okay, that is the east. The top of the screen is the north. The bottom of the screen is the south. And the left is west. And my head works in that way, just so that it's clear. You walk in from the east, and when you get into the temple courtyard, can you see my arrow? Okay. When you get into the temple, this is what is called the women's courtyard, and this is the Azara, right? This is the actual temple courtyard. In here, let's make it. Okay, so in here we have, this is what we're going to be calling the outside Mizbeach. Okay, that it has the ramp, and this is the Mizbeach. In here, right, again, in the actual sanctuary, right, what we would call the Kodesh, the holy, and the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Holy of Holies. This Mizbeach, this altar is the gold altar. That is called the inner Mizbeach, right? And as we learned, there are sacrifices, some that are brought inside, and most of them are brought on the outside. And what I mentioned before, this blue line over here is the base of the Mizbeach, where the blood was spilled. Okay, so that's just to get us the idea. Now, so when I say inside, outside, I mean here, right? Not to be confused with completely outside of the temple. Okay, so let's go back to what we were discussing. We were talking about the blood, and let's say the blood was placed on the horns of the Mizbeach, of the altar, and then the blood splashed onto the clothing. So then the Kohen does not need to wash it out. Again, what are we talking about in terms of washing it out? We're talking about the fact that if it's sanctified blood, it could not be in their clothing, right? It needed to be removed. If it wasn't sanctified, it could be in their clothing. So that is the issue, right? But blood that is fitting to be poured on the base of the altar, that again, if it splashes, needs to be poured out. Okay, as I mentioned, right, and we did this in the last Masechet, the ox, the par he'elim davar, if you remember the communal sacrifice that's brought by the nation if they made a mistake in a certain prohibition, that is brought inside into the Kodesh, into the holy area. That needs to be placed on the four corners of the altar on the inside. And now the Gemara teaches us on Daf 39 that if the Torah repeats a certain aspect of the law, then we learn from there that it is essential. Meaning, if you don't do it, then the whole sacrifice is seen as invalid and you have to start again. So now we're going to talk about what the sacrifices that need to be done on the inside. Again, chatat pnimit, that happens on the inside. So then all of those applications of blood are essential. However, the blood that needs to be placed on the altar outside, right, the chatat chitzoni, right, or outside, that not all of the applications are essential. And now the Gemara is going to speak this out. As we learned, there are sprinklings, right, or right applications of blood that happen inside on Yom Kippur. If you remember, we learned in Masechet Yoma all the different services that needed to be done on Yom Kippur. So the 7 sprinklings are essential. Therefore, you have to do all 7. However, smicha, meaning leaning on the animal, or the blood that's left over, that's poured onto the base, that maybe is not essential. So opinion number 1 is it's not essential. And on Daf 40, the Gemara says there's another opinion that actually smicha, leaning on the animal, and the shirayim, the leftover blood, is essential for the ox, for the par of Yom Kippur. Okay, so now again, the par Yom Kippur is a service, an avodah that's done inside in the Kodesh, in the Heichal, and it's compared to the other sacrifices that are also done inside to teach that all of those blood applications, in Hebrew, in the Gemara, they call it matanot, which literally means, right, a gift, right, a placement of blood on the altar. So all of the ones that are done inside are essential. The avodot that the Kohen Gadol does on Yom Kippur in his white clothing, those things that are done inside, if he does them out of order, so then it is invalid. He must do them in the specific order that the Torah tells him to do. However, anything that he does outside, again, in the courtyard, if he does it out of order, it is not invalid. The verse teaches that if he does all the sprinklings, then it's valid, even if he didn't pour out the leftover blood. Remember, we said shirayim is not essential. Or no, right? Another opinion is the blood must be poured on the foundation on the base of the altar, and that is essential. Again, that's a machloket. Okay. The Gemara then talks about, again, the par of Yom Kippur is brought into, again, the blood is brought into Kodesh HaKodeshim, right, the Holy of Holies. And the Gemara says, wait a minute, you can't compare that to the par he'elem davar, the ox that we learned about, again, the communal sacrifice that is brought if the nation does a transgression. And you cannot, right? You cannot compare those two because the communal sacrifice isn't brought into Kodesh HaKodeshim, into the Holy of Holies. It's only brought into the Kodesh, right, which is one step down. But you can compare the different communal sacrifices, right? So we learned this in the last Masechet, par he'elem davar, and the par and the korban, the sacrifice that's brought if the nation does idolatry. Those are both brought for a known sin, and therefore you can compare them. You cannot compare it to the par, the ox of Yom Kippur. Okay. However, the Gemara says maybe we can compare the par helem davar to the goat, the seir of Yom Kippur, because that actually is similar in terms of the service, the avodah. However, they're different animals, right? One is a par, an ox, and one or bull, and one is a seir, a goat. So maybe we cannot compare them. Again, in this Masechet, we're going to have a lot of extrapolations, right? What we call limudim, where we're going to learn one thing from another, and then from another, and from another, or we're going to learn from one verse to the other. So we're going to compare many of these sacrifices. So we're trying to find comparisons. Which sacrifice is most similar to the other? So now we say that the service of the ox of the nation, right, par ha'elem davar, and the goat of Yom Kippur have a similar service, similar avodah, but they are different animals. And again, the par, the ox of Yom Kippur, and the goat of Yom Kippur also are compared, but again, they are different animals. So again, it's very interesting to see what the Gemara chooses to compare these things. Another thing, since we're talking about comparisons, the Gemara teaches us that if I'm going to learn B from A, then I cannot learn C from B. Meaning, if one thing is a derivative, I can't now derive something else from that. It needs to be derived from, I'm going to call it the primary source. So therefore, we have to figure out what we're learning from what. Okay, so that was Daf 40. Daf 41 tells us that let's learn just from one verse, right? The verse in the context of par ha'elem davar, again, the ox that's brought for the nation, it says the word par 2 times, right? Par means ox. So therefore, we're going to learn that something is done twice, right, with 2 different animals, that part of this animal needs to be burnt. And we're also going to learn from this that the goat, the seir of idolatry, is also going to have a similar ruling. Now, one could say, wait a minute, it says the word par, which means ox, and you just learned it to seir, which is a goat. Those are 2 different animals. So the Gemara says, well, because, again, the service is similar, we're going to learn one from the other. We're less concerned about the type of animal, and we're more concerned with the actual service. Okay. And there's another verse that connects these 2 animals. Again, to connect is what we call a hekesh. Hekesh means we're connecting them because we learn it from the same verse. Okay, now, now those were about the animals. Now let's talk about the grain offering, the mincha. The mincha, yes, is one of the 3 prayers that we say, but it is also a type of sacrifice. It is a grain sacrifice. Well, there's a whole masachet. The next masachet is about the mincha, but basically it was fine flour that was mixed with oil and prepared in different ways: fried, baked, chopped up. We'll learn about it in the next masachet. So now the Gemara wants to know if again, how is this offering brought? You put all the things in a kli, in a vessel that is sanctified. Then the kohen scoops out a handful. That's called kmitza or a kometz. A kometz is a handful, and that handful is going to be placed onto the altar, onto the mizbeach. On that is also going to be frankincense, what's called livona. So kmitza is comparable to shchita, to slaughtering, right? You're taking something from the offering, and then you're going to place it on the altar. So the Gemara tells us that if you have improper intent, right, pigul intent, by only one part of the action that I just mentioned, again, you have to do kmitza and you have to take the livona. Now, both of those things go on the altar. So, but there's two parts. So one opinion is that if you have improper intent during one of those actions, it becomes pigul, it becomes invalidated, or no, you need that improper intent for both of those actions, meaning the whole action. Okay, another opinion is, let's say, or another scenario, you did the kometz with pigul thought, again, improper thought, and then you didn't think about anything when you took the livona. So then we say that it becomes pigul because when you didn't think anything when you took the livona, it means that you were basing it on the original intent. Since the original intent was pigul, again, a bad intent, then the whole thing becomes pigul. Okay, daf 42. Okay, we said that pigul, again, having improper intent, works even if you have this intent for only one application of blood on the altar. Generally, you have 4 applications. If you have improper intent for one of them, it becomes invalid. That is only for the outside mizbeach. But the inside mizbeach, you would need all the applications of the blood. You would have to have pigul intention for all 4 of those applications. Because again, because all 4 of them are essential, you need to have the same intent for each one of those for each one of those applications. Okay, then the Gemara teaches us that there's a machloket if part of an avodah, part of the service, if you have improper intent for only part of the service, can it affect pigul? Or no, the pigul, the improper intent, needs to be for the whole service, the whole avodah. So that is a big machloket when we're talking about improper intent. Now, the Gemara mentions the Yom Kippur service, again, in the Beit HaMikdash, and it had different parts, different animals, different sacrifices. And if you remember in Masechet Yoma, we actually discussed what happens if the blood spills in the middle of the service. So basically, you start again. So one opinion is that you start from the beginning of that section, right? Let's say, as we mentioned, we have an ox, we have a goat. So let's say you finish the whole service with the ox. Now you're up to the service with the goat. Something happened. You go back and you slaughter another goat. So one opinion is you go back to the beginning of the section. Another opinion is no, you can actually pick up exactly where you left off. If you can pick up where you left off, it shows that each application of blood is its own service, right? Because if it was all connected, you would have to start from the beginning. And therefore, this improper intent should, by only one application of blood, should affect the whole thing. So the Gemara says, okay, let's think about this. Let's say you had pigul thoughts during the first set, then no intent during the second, then pigul during the third. We still say that he did it with the intent of pigul, and the whole thing becomes pigul. It becomes invalidated. Or let's say you have pigul thought during the first, second, and third set, but not the fourth set. That would also still be pigul, because we assume that you had intent like the original intent. Now, the Gemara tells us that you still get, again, the punishment for pigul is karet. It's a very serious punishment, but you only get it if all the other services were done properly, right? And we've said this before, right? So let's say you had pigul intent when you slaughtered the animal, but then you had a different type of intent, meaning wrong, different type of intent, where you forgot what korban it was during putting on the blood, then that sacrifice is not pigul, because everything else needs to be done perfectly. So, right, if he had intent of pigul, then continued regularly, that's when it becomes pigul. But if the intent of pigul was only done in part of the service, and then the blood became invalid, and sprinkling it isn't valid, therefore it's not pigul, right? It doesn't work out. So the case is, the Gemara gives the case that let's say you had 4 bowls of blood from 4 different animals. Therefore, when you have pigul intent for one of them, that is seen as the whole avodah for that animal. Therefore, it's real pigul. Or no, even one animal, but one set, that would also be okay. The Gemara talks about the different applications of blood on Yom Kippur. There's actually a machloket how many there are. One opinion is there's 43, maybe there's 47, maybe 48, but it's the different applications of blood on the altar. Again, as we said with the mincha, right, you need intent with the kmitza, again, when you take the flour, or maybe also with the livona, right? Or again, either or you need intent with both of them. Okay, next Mishnah, Daf 43. The following things are not affected by pigul. Okay, the following things don't get affected, and we'll discuss what this means, right? So again, the komets that we mentioned, again, because when I do the komets, so then my intent will affect the sacrifice, but it doesn't affect the actual komets. The incense is not affected. The livona, the frankincense, is not affected. The mincha of the Kohen Gadol or of a regular Kohen, not affected. The blood, the libations, meaning the oil and the wine that are brought by themselves, or even ones that are brought with a sacrifice. the oil of the leper, of the mitzorah. There's a machloket if it gets affected by pigul, because it is connected to the sacrifice that it is brought with, or maybe it is not connected and therefore it does not get affected by pigul. And therefore, right, the Mishnah tells us anything that is the object of a permitter, what's called a matir of the mizbeach, is affected by pigul. But if it's not an object of the permitter, then it is not affected by pigul. And we'll explain this in a minute. The Gemara, the Mishnah now goes through different sacrifices and explains again. So let's just define, right? We have the word matir. Matir means this thing or this action is going to allow for something else to happen, right? Then that is called a matir, right? So for example, the olah in the burnt offering, the blood that's put on the altar is a matir, right? It allows for the meat to go onto the mizbeach to be burnt, and for the hides to go to the kohen, right? For a olat ha'of, a bird burnt offering, the blood that's put on the altar allows for, again, the meat to be put on the altar. The chatat ha'of, the sin offering that's a bird, the blood that goes on the altar is a matir for the meat to be eaten by the kohen, right? And therefore, that is going to affect pigul, right? Inner korbanot that are burnt, the blood allows for the innards to be burnt, or Rabbi Shimon says anything that's not brought on the outer mizbeach, there isn't pigul for that sacrifice. So now the Gemara is going to explain that if you put, right, again, let's say you had improper intent and you did the kmitza, so that mincha offering, the grain that you now put, you're not supposed to put it on the altar, but if you put it on the altar, on the mizbeach, it is no longer pigul. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain, we haven't learned this yet, but the Gemara explains that if a sacrifice is invalid, it's not allowed to be burnt on the mizbeach. However, if you did put it on the mizbeach, there are different categories of what happens to it. Sometimes we say, okay, listen, it's already on the mizbeach, so we're not going to take it off, right? So that's one option. Another option is, no, I don't care that it went on. It wasn't supposed to go on the mizbeach, so you have to take it off. Another category is it was on the mizbeach and it flies off, right? There's like some crackling on the fire and it gets thrown off the mizbeach. Do you put it back on or not? Okay, those are all, we're going to learn this in a Mishnah later on in the Masechet. But basically the Gemara here teaches that if you took the kometz, that is pigul, and you put it on the mizbeach. So if you're not supposed to put it on, but if you did, you do not take it off. Don't ask me how you're taking flour out of a fire, but let's just pretend, right? So it's like, it's like little pieces of, I don't know, crackers, let's say. So if you put it in the fire, you do not take it off the fire. But if it fell off the fire, you do not put it back on. Okay, next, the Gemara talks about 3 things that invalidate a sacrifice. Again, pigul, which we've seen before, notar, which means you left the meat overnight or to the second night or third night, depending on the which sacrifice it is, and tameh, right, impure. These three things, if you put them on the altar, so then it's as if they are valid and they stay there. But that is only if they started burning. As long as they started burning, so then you can leave them on the altar. Okay. When we talk about tum'ah, impurity, so now we're going to discuss: are we talking about the person is impure or the meat? So the Gemara says no. It's talking about the person is impure, because we have another verse that talks about the meat being impure, and the Gemara goes through different proofs how we know that we're talking about the person who is impure who eats from the sacrificial meat, and not talking about the meat being impure itself. Okay, daf 44. The top of the daf is very complicated. Talks about things, a person who is impure on different levels, right? We know that there are different levels of impurity of a person. And it also talks about different levels of impurity of the meat, right? Or of an object can have different levels of sanctity. So the Gemara compares those different things and discusses which get a more stringent punishment and which get a more lenient punishment. Okay, back to pigul. All sacrifices that are similar to the shlamim, to the peace offering, can become pigul. So too, if they're eaten in less time, meaning they don't have to be exactly like the shlamim, even if they're not eaten at all, like a burnt offering and an olah. All of these are in have the concept of pigul, and they can become invalidated. And as we said, we learn notar, right, leftover, tameh, impure, and pigul for all the sacrifices. Okay, not only the burnt offering, not only that, but it also includes bechor, the firstborn animal, is also included. There's a machluket if the oil, as we mentioned in the Mishnah, is that included in pigul or not, right? Because on one hand, it's not a sacrifice. On the other hand, it's linked to a sacrifice. So one opinion is it can be affected by pigul, and another opinion is that it cannot, because again, on one hand, it is connected to the sacrifice. On the other hand, it can be brought on a different day, and because it can be brought on a different day, it is not clear if pigul can invalidate it or not. Okay, we then speak about the chatat ha'of, right? The sin offering that's a bird. Bird sacrifices are not killed with slaughtering. They're killed with something, or slaughtered with something called melika. Melika is they would hold the bird, like the head of the bird, and then take their, it's kind of graphic, but they would take their fingernail and like kill the animal this way with their nail, not with a knife, and from the back as opposed to from the front. It was very complicated procedure, and it's also very complicated in the Gemara because generally shchita, right, slaughtering, is what makes something permissible to eat. And here in the temple, in the Beit HaMikdash, because you have Melika, there's a discussion, can the Kohen eat from this bird? The Gemara says yes, because that is what the Torah tells us to do in the temple. Obviously, outside of the temple, it would not be permitted to do, and it is not a kosher way to kill a bird. So the Gemara teaches that you can eat the bird that is killed in that way in the temple. In the grain offering, the menachot, we said that the leftovers can be eaten by the Kohanim. Okay. Okay. Next, let's go to Daf 45 to the next Mishnah. Now we're going to talk about the different types of sacrifices. And the Gemara talks about sacrifices of idolaters, right? Idolaters are allowed to bring, or non-Jews are allowed to bring sacrifices to the Beit HaMikdash, right? To the temple. However, these sacrifices cannot become pigul, notar, or tameh, meaning what we'll see in a minute, right? You don't get karet if one of these things happens. And basically, the Gemara explains that because of the verse, those three categories, pigul, notar, and tameh, only apply to Jewish sacrifices, not non-Jewish sacrifices. We'll see later on in the Masechet other differences between the different sacrifices. Okay, you are not allowed to get benefit from sanctified animals of a non-Jew. However, if you did misappropriate the animal, you do not get punished, meaning there's no what's called me'ilah. You do not get punished for misappropriating their animals. And as we said, there's no pigul, notar, or tum'ah, and they can't make substitutions, what's called tzmura. We'll learn about this later. Or no, everything applies to, another opinion is, everything applies. Just like a Jewish sacrifice, it applies to the non-Jewish sacrifice. This is learnt from a comparison between truma and me'ilah. Me'ilah, again, is basically stealing from God, meaning stealing a sanctified item. These things are only for Jews, and therefore, not only for that, but also for tum'ah, also for notar, also for pigul. All of these things are only for Jewish sacrifices, not non-Jewish sacrifices. Okay, if someone puts impure blood on the mizbeach by accident, that is okay, it's valid, and the meat can actually be eaten. But if you did it on purpose, it is invalid. This is only for a personal sacrifice, but for a communal sacrifice, it's always valid. But for a sacrifice of a non-Jew, it is never valid, right? So we see how we have different categories of sacrifices. Okay, next Mishnah. The following things, right? Things that are not liable for pigul, right? As we mentioned in the last Mishnah, we are liable, right? Again, we mentioned that certain things, pigul doesn't affect them, the improper intent. But notar, if you leave them over, or tum'ah, if they become impure, that does apply to those things, except for blood. The Gemara is going to explain. And this is only for things that are edible, but non-edible or inedible things, wood, frankincense, they do not become impure because they are not food. So the Gemara explains that pigul and tum'ah and impurity are very different. Therefore, sometimes it applies to things and sometimes it doesn't. Right? And tum'ah even applies to things that don't have a matir, they don't have a permitter, as we mentioned before. Okay, and as we said before, we learn notar from tum'ah. Again, the Gemara goes through a very complicated back and forth. What are we going to learn from what? And how do we determine what we're going to learn from? So the Gemara says, oh, maybe we should see how many variables are similar between A and B, and how many are similar between A and C. Maybe we should take the one that has the most. And then the Gemara says, no, let's go to the verse. And when the verse connects two things, then that is how we know what needs to be compared. So we're going to compare tum'ah and notar, and therefore those two things are similar. Pigul is different. And with that, we are going to take a break. This is all very complicated things. I see some people mentioned in the chat. Yes, these are very complicated things, very complicated laws, very complicated discussions. And Yomi asked about people with tefillah. That's very interesting. I think I would say that I would call it intent, right? Meaning we talk a lot about kavanah, right? Having proper intent when we pray. And I think that comes from here. I think the concept is that in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, when we were doing sacrifices, our intent really mattered. In the time nowadays, when we are praying, when we're davening, it is very important that we have proper kavanah, that we have proper intent. So it's similar but different. Yes, I'm happy to open it up for a few minutes of conversation, but I do have to say it is complicated, and yeah, I tried my best. Yes.
Who decides what the kavanah of the priest is when he's performing the task? Oh, Hashem, sure. But does he just finally say, well, I had a rotten thought? He actually confesses?
Excellent question. Yes. So there is going to be a discussion if intent is only intent, or maybe he actually has to verbalize it. And then people hear another opinion is that it's just intent. And then the priest actually admits, he says, listen, again, there's a lot, like you said, there's a lot between the Kohen and God, and that's why the punishment is from God. It's not a punishment from court, because only God really knows, what intent, who has what intent and what has intent. I was actually thinking about, how we'll learn in the next week that you need to have intent that you're sacrificing this animal for the owner of the animal. So the question is, how are you going to know who is whose? So I was thinking it could be like a doctor's office, like now servicing number 103, right? And it says this is Chana's, and it's a sin offering, and right. It's interesting, like how did they keep everything in track? It's a good question.
Yeah.
Not sure. Yes. Other comments or questions?
Well, sure, we have more. Somebody else go.
I think everyone is still digesting.
Is there a training session? I mean, he lost a couple sons. Aaron did. So, he's passing this all on. How
Yes.
long do they have to train for this?
Yeah, so great. So in the Torah, we see that Moshe teaches Aaron and his sons for 8 days.
That's all?
So that was their training session. If you remember in Yoma, when we talked about Yom Kippur, we also talked about the Kohen Gadol being trained for a week, for 7 days. So there was definitely training. We also have, I think in Tamid, in another Masechet, we talk about the young Kohanim who are trained, right? Pirchei Kohanim, right? So they grow up learning these things,
That makes
not
more
in a week.
sense.
The
Yeah.
week is the refresher course, but they are trained for years on how to do the proper services, how to recognize the different animals. So yes, it was all very
Wasn't it 25 years old? The Levites would start their training, and at 30, they're allowed to actually step into their role, full authority, and they have to retire at 50. And so I was at first thinking, well, maybe that just is to keep the brain sharp, retire before you go to senior moments. But then I realized at the same time, wait a minute, the Kohen Gadol gets to serve for a whole lifetime. I mean, he doesn't have to retire at a certain age. So I probably wasn't for that reason. It was probably just for physical strength.
Yeah, generally it was for physical strength. We'll learn more about the different things that needed to be done, and bending and lifting and carrying animal limbs. It was very physical, and I think that they kept it again, not too young and not too old, because they wanted to make sure everyone was fit and able to do their avodah. Yes. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, just an announcement. The next 2 weeks, yes, the next 2 weeks I'm going to be traveling for work. So we're going to move the class to Monday night, regular time. I think in America you're changing,
1 hour later for me.
You're changing the clock. So then we'll be back to our
We already
regular.
did it.
Oh, you already changed?
Well, I don't change. Whoever changes, I think they already did.
No, I think you're changing
because
this
you were
coming
1
week.
hour. You were 1 hour later today.
Okay, yeah.
The USA generally will change this coming Sunday. This coming Sunday.
Oh, it's
Okay,
okay.
so we'll be back to, I guess, the regular difference in time. So we're going to be learning on Mondays at 9 p.m. Israel time for the next 2 weeks, and then we'll go back to Wednesday. So I will send out an email, but just letting you know, trying to keep it as consistent as possible.
How did you get to 6 with all the Jewish holidays? I thought they were Jewish holidays for me. I couldn't turn my computer on. How did you get 6 classes in? One I understand I missed, but what about those other first 5?
I've been teaching every week forever.
I have a question. When this started, at the very beginning, when we started, did you sign up for 7 years?
No, she didn't.
That is such a good question. When they asked me to do it, I told them I would do it for 3 months.
Oh my goodness. Oh my
3
goodness.
months. I said maximum 6 months. It's been almost 6 years.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Baruch Hashem. And for your
Baruch
help
Hashem. Hashem should just give me strength
Amen,
and
amen.
ability to do this. I mamash Baruch Hashem have not missed 1 week. So thank God.
It's wonderful. Just like
Yeah.
kol kavod to you. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hashem,
Thank you so
Hashem
much.
gives me strength.
Amen, amen.
Is your family all healthy? Your family's all, they made it through
Baruch
that
Hashem. Baruch Hashem. Thank you. Yes. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you,
Okay.
everyone. Wishing
Thank
everyone
you.
a Shabbat
Bye-bye, guys.
Shalom.
And happy
And,
birthday.
Shabbat
Mira.
Shabbat
Happy
Shalom,
birthday,
everybody.
sir.
and
Thank you,
we'll meet.
Razani.
My
Happy
pleasure.
birthday,
See you
Mira.
next week. Have a great
Okay.
Shabbat.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.